Welcome to Surviving Saturday, a podcast about holding on to hope in the midst of life's difficulties, disappointments, and dark seasons.
Times like that remind us of the agony and despair the followers of Jesus felt on the Saturday of Easter weekend, in between the Friday on which he was crucified and the Sunday on which he rose from the dead.
That Sunday forever changed the way that humans can relate to God. But what does it look like to be honest about the very real pain we experience in the in-between?
To fervently cling to hope in the God who promised us his peace and his presence, at times when he feels distant or even cruel.
I'm Wendy Osborne, a licensed counselor in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I'm her husband, Chris, a marriage mediator, conflict resolution coach, and trauma-informed storywork coach.
Join us each episode for authentic conversations about how life not turning out as we'd expected has created the contextual soil for the growth of a tenacious hope in the resurrection and in a God who is still making all things new. Hello, Chris.
Why, hello, Wendy.
We are back. It's been a while since it's just been us.
It has. We've had a fun run of some really cool guests that we've been really honored to get to spend time with. And certainly prompted our thinking about all different kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So the latest conversations among them have been on marriage and how can the idea of the technique of story work help marriages. And so that led us to start thinking about what exactly the purpose of marriage is.
Well, and I think it's been a real privilege just to interact with Dan Allender and then with the calls, because they've been influential, I think, for us, not just in theory and in, we read this and they, described this well. That is true. But because we've experienced story work with them, like their care, both of them in two different settings, and different settings for both of us even, has been really, I think we would point to now, one of the most transformative things we've experienced for our marriage. Wouldn't you say? Would you agree?
Yep, absolutely.
Not that anything that we learned or experienced before was bad or incomplete. It's just as Dan says, there's always more. There's always more you can learn. There's always a deeper level of intimacy you can reach, and definitely deeper understanding of your own story to help deal with how you show up and how things show up in your marriage. But you raised a good question, though, to start with. Before you have to think about how does story work benefit a marriage. It kind of raises the question, well, what's the point of marriage? What do we think marriage is about anyway? It's probably important to establish that first.
And spoiler alert, I think it is about learning to love better and more genuinely.
Okay.
But I think that many explanations that I have thought define the meaning of marriage or have been told through the years include that I will never be lonely again.
Yes, I would say that's probably, I don't know if I would have articulated it that way, but I really felt like, oh my gosh, that's why you get married. You found the person who, quote unquote, completes you. There's the whole famous Jerry Guiarma scene, you had me at hello and you complete me, which is, there's that idea of, I'm alone. There's this missing piece who's out there that will complete me. The idea of a soulmate.
And if we're Christians, you can't leave me. So then I have my person all the time.
Yes.
And so I'm never left alone. I'm never left to fend for myself. I'm complete. So that's one.
And one of the things that the loneliness piece I think was surprising too is we're not talking about you'll be lonely in marriage because your spouse is terrible or horrible. There may be things that happen, like I remember the time we were in the hospital for like a week when you had pancreatitis.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like there was, was it that lonely? Yes. Because I was there with you and you were knocked out on drugs.
Yep.
And so.
Which felt really great, by the way.
That's right. I remember that was being a very interesting moment watching you discover Dilaudid. Can I have more? But if I had the expectation of fulfillment from you in general, well, that week, it's not going to happen. And it's not your fault. It's not you doing anything bad. You just don't anticipate the life circumstances that will happen, or maybe a a family member has an extended illness. There's all kinds of things that get in the way of just because I'm married now, I'm going to be happy. Now I'm going to not be alone.
Yes. Yes. I think another is it's a way to be sexually fulfilled, to be pure, to do the right thing, but to be able to enjoy sex.
Yes. And another place where it's probably oversold. And certainly I know what I heard growing up in 1980s purity culture, save yourself for marriage.
Yes.
Don't have sex as a high schooler, as a teenager and all. And the promise sort of was when you get married, you'll have sex and it's exactly as God designed it. And it's fulfilling.
It'll be so amazing.
Yes.
That's what I was told.
And then when you encounter reality of actually it doesn't work that way, it certainly doesn't work how it's been portrayed for us in the movies, many of which were made by men, you can tell, because they have very unrealistic depictions of what it takes to be in the mood for sex, what the differences in how different people, not just men and women, but just different people may, engage in sex differently and all.
Yep.
But so that was sort of but definitely I think that's why a lot of my peers and I, we got married so young. It's like, well, that's how we get there. And then to discover actually, it's challenging. It's sometimes painful. It's to even learn, especially if you haven't had much experience. I mean, there's all kinds of complications. We don't want to get too far down that bunny trail. I think it's interesting also. Today's kids or young adults they're viewing marriage differently. What would you say you see or hear as sort of kind of how they're
I'm curious what you're thinking of.
Well, I'm thinking of how it I think there's a lot of distrust in the institution of marriage. I think they've seen marriages fail.
I would agree.
They have grown up in an era in which more about the dirty laundry of not only celebrities, but people in the media, leaders,
including Christian leaders and Christian families.
Very much so. And they know kind of, golly, that they've sort of had all those myths that we came along, and we were influenced by. They've sort of all been busted. Yeah. And the institution has somewhat been robbed of what is its value? What is it for? And so they're, deferring, waiting, and yet having a lot of what we see out there, a lot of really committed relationships. And there's a desire for companionship and monogamy and togetherness, but are they they don't care whether they have the church's stamp or the government stamp. There's definitely that.
I know that in your legal practice, you've worked with quite a number of couples who have chosen the cohabitation route and they've lived together long term, but chosen to not pursue marriage.
That's right. And if they, sort of my philosophy is if they don't try to buy property together, if they're just, people who rent, or they keep, sometimes when people cohabit, they keep their property really separate and they don't mix bank accounts, and they are very contractual about who does what. A lot of the time though, I've seen a lot of these cases recently where they have brought property together. They have started a business together. They've gotten more entangled. And then when they break up, it's a lot harder to disentangle because they don't have the protections of marriage laws or anything. So they can't, they want to divide everything equally, and there's no presumption that they will. Then they want to get into, well, who paid what, who contributed what was our deal, what was our promise, and that gets really, really sticky. But I think we are going to see a movement towards it is more somewhat of an economic transaction, whether you call it marriage or not. I have one client who, they did not get married, but they have what they called some kind of commitment ceremony. And I don't know what exactly it was, but then the mom, and they were having a kid together, and the mom actually changed her name to the husband's name so the kid would have the same name, but they did actually get married.
They didn't get married.
Yeah,
so
I've never
just
seen
legally changed her name.
Yeah, and so she has the same name, but they weren't married.
Yeah, so there's a lot of maybe confusion in this culture around just following traditional marriage.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't help that Christians have a fairly high divorce rate as well. So
this is true.
We haven't really given them a great reason to follow our model. One of the messages that we received early on was the idea that marriage, rather than being something that would make you happy, is a relationship rather that would make you holy.
Yes.
And I remember, because although I loved God, I was not sure how much God really loved me. I found that a really scary proposal. That he didn't really care if I was happy, which to me meant, I think I equated with relationally safe. And instead, he wanted me to be holy, which felt like an ethereal notion to me. So I wasn't really sure if I mattered in the equation.
When you say ethereal, can you say more about what you mean?
Like theoretical, maybe that's a better word.
Yeah,
Like he wanted me to be holy. I couldn't really nail down what that would mean for me as a person, except for I was supposed to be really, really, really good and become more and more and more good. But it didn't matter if my heart felt safe or my body felt safe in the relationship.
Well, and I think the other thing that can be missed in that is it feels like this can almost become this form of sort of masochism of like, well, I'm not happy, but oh my gosh, I'm being made more holy. This
Sort
suffering,
of a martyrdom.
almost a martyrdom.
Yeah.
And also, I think we're learning now as well. We were just at a conference a couple weeks ago talking about some places where people have been vulnerable to abusive relationships and some of the messages the church has sent that have fostered that. And one is, somebody may say a spouse is bringing, to somebody in church or a counselor or something, hey, this is happening. This is harmful, hurtful. I don't like this. I'm not comfortable. And if we use that, well, marriage isn't to make you happy, it's to make you holy.
Yeah.
It sort of sends this message of, well, this is your suffering. This is your cross to bear. So he's an asshole when he comes home. You are going to be made more like Jesus for it. And that can become both a cover, but it also can become a way that an abuser, somebody who really is, not becoming more Christ-like, who is trying to cause harm, they sort of hide behind that. Like, well, I'm just refining you. They wouldn't necessarily say it that way, but they take on that sort of attitude.
And then you have very earnest victims of that abuse who really want to do the right thing. And they want to do what God has called them to do. And so they agree to suffer what is actually abuse, thinking that is actually just them being made holy. So I've heard very painful stories. And I think we have to be careful about letting that be a rationale for marriage unto itself. Does God want his people to grow in their ability to love and to become more Christ-like? Yes. And just like people are complicated, so are marriage relationships.
Yeah. And so I think I definitely was vulnerable to the idea that marriage would be a cure for loneliness. It would be a cure for, a place to release sexual energy, really, is sort of how it's phrased, which looking back, I'm like, why did we say it that way?
Yeah.
And we've been reading some good materials that we'll probably share later in a later episode about, recapturing a vision for sex and sexuality that's not this tension release thing.
Yes.
It's made for so much more than that.
Yes.
But I think what we started realizing is that the expectations that we each brought in, they came from somewhere. They came from messages that we got in the Christian circles we were in and the families we were in, but also just from the experiences we had. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely. And I think we bring them into marriage even when they're not formed into words in our minds.
I think that's the trickiest part. Yeah, there was, I think we were joking actually when we had Dan on about the idea of could we go back and redo our vows and be more explicit about what we thought we were getting into or what we thought we were vowing for, but do some correctives to that almost and make more realistic vows really. But so I think we also started realizing that so we bring in these expectations. And for me, it was, I think I also had a dynamic of, it was very familiar to me to care for, a woman's needs or girl's needs. I sort of was the best friend guy. I was the person who listened.
Well, we started out as best friends.
That's right. That's right. But I had a series of relationships where I was this great listener and I was super supported. And I had learned to do that really well. My mom had essentially trained me to do that because I was kind of her caregiver a lot in the wake of my parents, chaotic marriage, separation, divorce, all of that. So for me, I really relish the idea of I'll be this really good caregiver. This is what gives me value. This is what gives me, in a way, it gave me fulfillment. I wouldn't have said it that way, but that was definitely how I was operating. And so I think that was a big disappointment and frustration when we got married. And there were times I could not care for you. Either I had harmed you or I had missed you or somehow, or it just wasn't going to work. And that would sort of make me almost, feel like I was going crazy. Like I'm supposed to be good at this. This is how we got together because we were best friends.
Yep.
And for me to run into failure and not know how to fix a situation or to give you comfort, there are places where you were dealing with something so deep, you were inconsolable to a sense.
Yeah.
What did that feel like on that side for you?
Well, I chose you as a romantic partner and then agreed to marry you because you were an incredibly safe friend. And I don't think at the time I was thinking in terms of the reality that romantic relationships had not been safe for me. But we were talking recently about people we dated when we were very young.
Yeah.
And I was actually cheated on quite a bit.
Yes. It was
I
kind
had
of
never put together how many times that story played out. And part of it was I was so committed to being good that I could be like the good girl someone dated.
Yep.
And then they could have these like side hustles.
These little flings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Side chicks.
Yeah. And so I paid a price for the way that I chose to engage in romantic relationships, but I experienced you as so different. But what I did not realize is that my heart had very different categories for friendship and the intimacy of a romantic relationship or a husband.
Okay. And how would you say that they were different?
Well, I think a friend, you were with for limited amounts of time, and I could take what they could give and figure out the rest on my own.
Yeah.
But a husband for life, I think I came in without words, desperate to feel safe and protected in the most intimate parts of me.
Yes.
To never be lonely, and to have somebody that could, I think, rescue me from all the emotional pain that was inside. And look, I wasn't aware of most of the emotional pain, but I knew that I needed something outside myself.
Yes. I would have said something similar on the surface like that as well. I did not realize how much I was looking to you to soothe emotional wounds and pain as well. I thought, I'm showing up being the romantic guy. You have those gestures. I think another thing that did not serve us well also is, since we dated primarily long distance, other than the first month or so we got together, and then another month or so when we were engaged, I think we were long distance, which meant
very long distance.
When we, like 6 hours apart, or was it like 3 or 4? It was about 6. Yeah. When we got together, when it was time for a visit, the rest of the world pretty much stops.
Yes.
Your significant other is there. And so we were used to, oh my gosh, now because we're around each other, the world stops.
Yes.
I orient everything towards you because that's what you do when you're long distance. We had almost no experience of what does it look like to just get through life.
Yes.
When are you going to go hang out with friends? And I'm not involved. When are you going to have time to yourself?
Yeah.
And I'm not, we had no way of cultivating that. So when we get married and we have these different expectations, and we'd never been there before.
Yes. And so then disappointment comes in.
And I think that's a common theme that if it hasn't happened in your marriage, then, you must be still picking the rice out of your hair. Okay. And probably even then, there are stories of, we know too many people's stories of, well, even ours, of disappointment on your wedding day, on your honeymoon, disappointment, when you get your first house established or whatever it is. If disappointment, it will come at some point in time, the high and the intoxication of, I've been on the quest and I found the one who loves me and I've won her heart and
Yep.
oh, he really loves me, all that sort of dissipates. Disappointment is going to show up. And our friends at the Barnabas Center, this was powerful for us to learn. I remember that, look, you have disappointment, you're doing something with it. And I like how they captured it with a bunch of D words. You can deny it, like, not really, no, everything's good, he's fine, whatever. You can demand, basically, hey, I want this to be different, and you can make it known, and you can make it known in more forceful ways, either outwardly or just kind of by withholding, and kind of pulling away if you don't get what you want. And then there's despair. What does that look like?
Like giving up. It's cynicism. It's why bother. It's it's futility.
Not even going to try anymore.
Yeah.
And then sort of the extreme version of that is we can disconnect or disassociate. It's a little different from the others because it's basically finding something else to put our life in. We're not explicitly saying, I'm so unfulfilled and disappointed here, I'll just go find life elsewhere. We just are doing it.
Yeah.
And sort of, it's kind of, in a way, combining.
It can be work or hobbies or children. I mean, it can be anything.
Yeah.
That we choose over our spouse.
Yes, exactly. And so given that, we've got to have, marriage has to, our starting place for what marriage is about. It can't be about preventing there from being disappointment, because that's not going to happen.
Right.
Marriage maybe is better viewed as a crucible in which God has us experience disappointment, and then it, at least I know my experience partly was, it reorients my relationship to God. Like, what am I going to do with disappointment? What am I going to do either when you fail me or when I fail you? And I'm not sure which I experienced worse. They both were terrible.
Yeah.
And they both were not things I expected to happen really at all.
Right.
Because we had been friends, and we didn't have a our
contentious relationship.
Yeah, our dating relationship had no conflict. In fact, we didn't know what, like, I feel a little bit weird. I kind of don't like what you've done, but we didn't know how to do that, how to say that or whatever. So how would you kind of capture, especially like when you're working with people, but also for us, what was sort of a vision for what is the design of marriage?
Well, I mean, like the spoiler alert I gave earlier, I think it is a route to becoming better lovers of people. Okay. And I would say specifically, it's helping one another move along the arc of redemption, which would mean helping each other become more of the man or the woman that God had in mind for us to be.
Okay. And a piece of that, when I hear you say that, it's not about, I will find the person who will help me feel loved, but it's how will I become a person who loves well, again, not in a way that is selfless and consumed. Like if one person's loving well and the other person's just taking, that's not healthy.
Well, I don't think that if you're letting another person take, you're actually loving them.
That's right.
Because you're not calling out the best in them.
Yes.
You're enabling their immaturity. But I think that to become a person who loves better and better is a very painful and sacrificial process.
Yes. I'm reminded, in fact, of one of our favorite kind of a storybook character sort of thing. And we heard it, somebody referred to it at a conference we were at recently, but the Velveteen Rabbit.
Oh, yeah.
Which I remember hearing Tim Keller talk about years ago as well. But there's that passage about, what happens when you're loved.
Yeah.
And basically when you're loved, is when
you become unrecognizable,
and you become real.
Yeah.
You use it, and the character says, you kind of have your eyes sort of worn off, and your hair is all, you're basically these stuffed animals. We're talking about how they come up, But you become real, and then you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. But this idea of becoming a more, more Christ-like in our love, I think we'd say too, that the beautiful thing about Jesus and what keeps me coming back to him and loving him and wanting to worship him, even as I am questioning and puzzled by all the manifestations of Christianity today. I'll leave it at that. People who are saying and doing things in his name. Jesus himself is very challenging to any of us. Yeah. Are you loving well? Look at this standard. And we all go, well, there's places where maybe I've got grace but no truth, or truth but no grace. We all are falling short. And so if we have that idea that marriage is for the purpose of helping us to love better, And we do hope that we will experience love in that as well. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
this weird sort of crucible thing. So how would you describe then what is story work? Where does story work come in as a particular means to that end?
Well, I think first we've got to learn what is behind our own failures to love.
Okay.
Okay. So, like, what has formed me? What has formed me to self protect in the ways I do?
Yes.
What has formed me to demand the things I do?
Yes.
What is it that I desire, and how have I learned to get those desires met?
Yes. It kind of taking it back to the idea of disappointment. There
Yeah.
are some things that are disappointing, like to me, and not you.
Yeah.
Why do I have the particular disappointments that I do?
Right.
Like one just very basic example, but like if we don't talk for a period of time, that can impact you. Now that you're kind of working, you're with people all day, not as much, but like when you were home
Mm-hmm.
and with the kids and I was working, you're like, can I talk to an adult? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you're
Right.
my person and all that. And for me, I'm like, this is not a good thing, but like because of ADD or whatever, out of sight, out of mind, but it doesn't mean out of heart. Like as soon as I'm back with you, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're great. And the
Mhm.
fact that I haven't heard from you, it would be a long time before that bugged me. Like eventually I'm going to probably get, I wonder what's going on. I haven't heard from you, but it would be a longer time before I'd even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just because of the way that I was formed.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
so good or bad.
Right. Right. And something I would say you're working on.
Yes.
And so you notice when that out of sight, out of mind is not loving to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we've learned to be more purposeful about when and how do we connect in a way that meets
Yeah.
both of our
Yep.
desires. And even just stepping back to say, how much, what do we desire?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's first story work is a matter of what are the experiences that have formed me, but how have they formed me to love the things I love, fear the things I fear, long for the things I long for, and fail to love other people. The second part of story work in the context of marriage is to learn to see your story through those similar lenses. So what has broken your heart? What has set you up to be unable to receive care and love, to long for care and love in certain ways? But I have to grieve the broken experiences of both my life and story and yours before we get to the life together.
So I want us to kind of name where we're going here and kind of come back and unpack that concept, because I think that's really a powerful way of phrasing it. I think a lot of people come to story work and often come when they have tried a lot of other things. Like we did early in our marriage. When we experienced conflict, our first instinct was, oh, well, we need tools. We need to learn how to fight. People said, learn how to fight fair, learn how to fight better. And that is helpful. And I'm not knocking that as far as it goes. But it did not solve everything. And there were times like we had read the books on fighting fair and we knew communication techniques and they were not accessible. Like we were not able to get that part of our brain or heart to come to bear. With a lot of other couples that we work with, sometimes so the need to do some kind of deeper healing shows up in conflict, and conflict that's either recurrent, they can count on if this topic comes up, they're going to have a fight. And it's not very frequent, but it's super intense when it happens. Some couples that I talk with we don't fight that much, but then when we did, the wheels just completely came off.
Yeah.
Some people come at story from a different place. They're disconnected. They're checked out. They're experiencing that disappointment, and they are going more to dissociation or disconnect.
Because we have all learned different ways to deal with our pain.
Yes.
Given our context, sometimes fight to be heard or to have our needs met didn't work. Sometimes it was going quiet and soothing ourselves.
Yes.
So we want you to hear there's not a better way. They're just different ways.
That's right. And this overlays with, as we talk about frequently, that we all have when we do something activates something, hits a button, hits a sore spot or a deep wound, we react in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about getting triggered. I think that's a helpful word for it, because at some point our brain and body are are at war, and our body sort of takes over, and the more primitive parts of our brain and nervous system kind of are driving the train.
Right.
And for me, that was a powerful and helpful revelation once it finally got through all my defenses and all my resistance, to recognize I may be smart as all get out. I may be logical. I may be well read. I may be trying so hard to love Jesus. But when I get activated, when a part of my story gets hit, all that goes out the window.
Right.
And it's inaccessible. Right. And I communicate more out of desperation, or I check out of desperation. And to realize, that's what's happening in you as well, was a big turning point. Like, oh, you're not just a bad person, and you're certainly not, you didn't go from being this very brilliant person to being stupid. We all do that when the frontal lobe goes offline and we are reacting to something, and then we are not logical.
But I think we can hit a bind as Christians when we have such a big rupture between us as a married couple. And it feels like suddenly we've not only failed each other, we failed Jesus. Because weren't we better, more faithful, stronger Christians than this?
Yes.
And it really has nothing to do with that. There are these young parts of us that are activated into desperation.
Yes.
And we are trying these strategies that once worked when we were young.
Yes.
And now no longer are appropriate.
Right.
To get ourselves to safety.
Like one that I'm smiling as I think of that you maybe learned early on in marriage. Oh my gosh, there's 5 love languages. Did you know that? And great work by Gary Smalley. There are 5 love languages, and speaking the other person's love language that they receive, not the one that you're giving because it's what you would want. That's a radically helpful concept, but it's not enough.
Yes.
It's not going to get you through these, how do I respond when I don't get, kindness or touch or whatever my love language is. And so I think a lot of people end up maybe trying something a little bit more when you have tried other things. And the other thing, I love how Dan Allender also reminds us always, even if you have a good marriage, it can be a better marriage.
There's always more.
There's always somewhere you can grow. And that, I think, that's been a helpful thing for us as well. I think there were times and seasons when we were going through marriage counseling or going to marriage intensives and things where like, fix this and fix the broken and at least help us, get back to peacefulness. But to be invited to the story work context is where we were invited, I think, to more. Like, hey, you have some really good intimacy as well. That's part of what I would experience is our intimacy and our connection was so good that when it wasn't there because of my fault, your fault, didn't matter. When it was not accessible, I would almost fall apart. I'm like, what happened to that really good? And I needed to be able to, hold up okay and know it's going to cycle or we're going to miss each other, but we will come back around. And this idea of being invited to more and that we can grow in intimacy felt a little easier or better to pursue than just stop being an asshole, stop being a jerk, stop being bitchy, whatever, however the labels we take on ourselves. Hey folks, we're going to pause the conversation right there and divide this conversation into 2 different episodes. So be on the lookout for part 2 of this episode of the Surviving Saturday podcast. I want to take a minute, though, here in this interstitial space to extend an invitation, particularly to any men out there who might be listening, or ladies. Maybe you can pass this invitation on to your guy if you think it might be worthwhile. I am part of a nationwide organization, really international organization called the Samson Society. And the Samson Society is a fellowship of Christian men who are serious about authentic relationship and authentic community, humility, and recovery, particularly from various forms of addiction, brokenness in relationships, any kind of hidden struggles or difficulties that men may have had. If you want to find out more about what Samson Society is about, you can check out the website samsonsociety.com. And also they have a fantastic podcast that is called the Pirate Monk Podcast. Pirate and then monk like monk in a monastery. The name comes from a book that was written by a pastor named Nate Larkin back in early 2000s called Samson and the Pirate Monks, calling men to authentic brotherhood, and that's another way you can learn about the organization as well. It's been a real great blessing to me in finding some honest, real, down-to-earth brothers to walk with, to share honestly about what's going on in our lives. It's really some of my favorite people that I've encountered have been through the Samson Society. It's people who get this idea of being on a journey and doing work to understand why we are the way we are, why we react and operate the ways that we do, particularly when we're stressed and lonely and frustrated and all things like that. And it's a great just fellowship and a positive, just an alternative to what you might find out there sometimes if, community in your church or in your normal circles of friends is not really coming out like you'd like it. Why I'm mentioning it now is because I am actually one of the co-chairs of the Charlotte chapter, which now meets on Wednesday nights in Matthews. And so if you have any interest at all in just coming and checking out a meeting sometime and seeing what we're all about and meeting some of the other really great guys who are involved, please shoot me an email at chris@nurturecounseling.net, and I'd be glad to give you some more information and let you find out when and where we meet, and see if you want to come by and visit, pop in. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to do anything, and I can show you other ways to get involved in the organization as well. So again, just shoot me an email if you're interested, and we'd love to have you come and visit sometime. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Surviving Saturday podcast.